Now, are you as hardcore as donning face paint when you would go on your mission?
I think different teams had like different debates about that. We took camouflage very, very seriously. I think like the reconnaissance role, if you're really into it, you have to be extremely humble about it. And these illusions that like 6 or 7 guys are going to hold off several hundred, that's a worst case scenario that you do everything within your power to mitigate and avoid. So we took camouflage like very, very seriously. Everyone would like cam me up before missions. Some people would take this like more seriously than others. All of our personal equipment is going to be like camouflaged. Guys would like really pay attention to like what they were eating, like dipping, smoking, like days and weeks prior before a mission, just to try to camouflage the way we smelled from locals, right? So it was taken. That part was taken like really, really seriously, from lessons learned, and now going back into like SOG history, you understand where these lessons started. And in Afghanistan, I deployed twice there with Force Recon. You saw that almost all these lessons are still valid, and we had opportunities to kind of improve on these things, right? Like the smell thing, that might not have been that was something that was relevant in Vietnam, right? Because the North Vietnamese would use dog teams to track teams occasionally, right? We never had that in Afghanistan in terms of dogs, but what we did have a huge problem with was shepherds. And it was our theory that like, goats, sheep, whatever, like they're just kind of, grazing around or whatever. Dog. But if they smell something weird, they're going to migrate towards it, right? Especially if it, smells like American laundry detergent and food. So, a little history lesson there.
The reason why I bring that up is because you have some style. I want to just mention your Instagram. Is that cool with your 1,000-yard style? It's a blue check mark for those of you that really need to know, right? It's legit. And it's got a lot of cool photography. And, Robert's also a fashion designer from his experience in the military. He's just brought to him, he's brought his unique style to his bags, those sea bags that you make, that you've invested your energy into, that have like the ability to put like a sleeping bag or a mat on the bottom of it when you want to tote it, and how you have it to blend in. That's why I brought up your camouflage on your face, because you're basically doing that with that bag. You got all these guys out there that are like, we're this gray man.
Right.
Okay. And I can still spot that, right? I'm like, I just am going to wear camouflage, bro. But honestly, you're going to like places where it's not friendly towards you sometimes. You just, I believe, got back from Ukraine, right? You've been over there for a minute doing some, and you got to blend in. Did you have to blend in? That's why I was wondering, you got to just kind of like.
I mean, I think the idea of camouflage is as important as it is like misunderstood, right? It's interesting for me that I've ended up in other careers post-military where camouflage was still relevant and still important. I spend about like half the year now working as like a photojournalist. And, to your point about the whole sort of gray man thing, the gray man doctrine was kind of what we were taught going through the schoolhouse, and was really like kind of beaten into us in the reconnaissance community. This idea that, don't be first, don't be last, don't ever let them know your name, right? Like to blend in, to be a part of the crowd, not to stick out, and not to kind of like profile yourself. But that in and of itself has become a uniform that anyone who is in that arena, be it, military or intelligence, can pick up on instantly, right? So now it's not really, that's not really effective camouflage anymore.
It's not really gray.
But, to your question, since my military experience, I spent a considerable amount of time in Afghanistan, even more time in Ukraine, a little bit in Iraq, a lot of time just like in kind of places that were a little bit tense overseas.
Hostile?
Some hostile, some not. Like Lebanon's a good example, right? Like I went to Lebanon in, I think, 2016 with a wonderful French woman I was dating at the time. And for her, it was very much a vacation. And for me, I'm like, this is Hezbollah territory.
Yep.
And you come to understand the world is made up a lot of these places where like little neighborhood borders can go from a place where everything is kind of normal and tactile and understood to you to being extremely foreign and potentially dangerous. But camouflage being a part of that, like as a journalist or, whatever, traveling abroad, you have to pay attention and kind of like do what you can to mitigate your signature and kind of communicate as little as possible to, the people around you, right? Information is always very easily weaponized. And there's a flip side to that too, which is like the more that you pay attention to culture and the way people dress, it's also easier for you to understand the people around you, right? I remember seeing you at SHOT Show with like the non boots and the tiger stripe pants, right? And like obviously in SHOT Show that's not the craziest thing, right? But to me, I was like right away, I was like, oh, like this guy's got some Vietnam vibes, right? Like I can go up to him and we can talk about, X, Y, and Z.
Oh yeah, and we did.
And everywhere else I've been in the world, some kind of that like local specialized knowledge has paid off. So many times in Ukraine, because like I'm a little bit of a gear queer, right? Like I know I'm not like as into it as I used to be, but like I can talk about the different tactical brands and I can recognize them, right? Sort of like a little bit attuned to lingo. That makes it really easy to talk to like the higher tier and like younger Ukrainian soldiers that are out there. The older set of guys who are kind of from the very Soviet style military, right? Like guys whose career started before the Maidan Revolution. They're not really like, they're part of a different system. The younger guys, like you can see them with their cry stuff or Roman made stuff, right? And you can go to them and talk to them about it, right? And that establishes like a level of trust that like they understand that you understand. And maybe they're a little bit less suspicious of you being a journalist who's there to like throw them underneath the bus, right? Because like you talk the lingo. That's an easy comparison. And like a kind of more difficult one would be like Afghanistan, huge language barrier. You're trying to kind of make rapport with people who are totally from a different culture and don't have a shared language. But even with that, like there's a kind of universal respect for style, right? And it is like, it's not language based. Like you don't need to have any shared language to be able to communicate that like, oh dude, like you've got style, right?
Like, I like your glasses.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and
some dude, you're like, oh, your glasses, those are cool.
Yeah. And like, I spent a little time there and you kind of come to understand that before the Taliban took over the country, right? Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was a Mujahideen leader, right? Was sort of the style icon of everyone who was not in support of the Taliban, right? And if you could like look at him, you'd see it reflected in the way like military guys dressed, older guys have been Mujahideen. And if you started to kind of like emulate that a little bit, like look at the way this guy's dressed, look at the colors he wore, right? Look at the way he like wore his Pekal hat and his field jacket. And you can kind of do that thing yourself. People would sort of intuitively pick up that like, okay, this guy knows his history a little bit. He knows what's going on culturally a little bit, right? And you're just kind of, you're going to have more familiar and friendly ground with someone automatically.
Oh yeah, the Pakul hat is a Pakul story, bro.
Yeah.
It's a pretty Pakul hat you got there, bro. I love it, dude. I love it. And it's got also multiple, like you could put grain in it to feed the horses, and it could be like a carrier, and it also can roll up and go onto their head.
Oh yeah.
There's just multiple purpose. Yeah. And if you go over that, if you knew that, that would probably go, oh,
well, and
this?
If you understand the history of it, right, and you go to the different regions where it's more or less predominant, right, you can read so much into that. So the Pekal hat originally came in like the 13th century, and it was brought by the Greeks.
Wow.
So this is what Alexander the Great's men were like wearing. It wasn't even Greek; it was Italian, right? They pretty sure it came from Florence, right? And if you go to Florence and you see like their kind of historical reenactment today, you can see a similar thing just done in a slightly different way. And when this hat arrived in Afghanistan, it was really only in a province called Nuristan. Nuristan is super remote. It's known for being like wild and inconquerable. They only converted to Islam about 110 years ago. And it is tangentially directly next to Panjshir, right? So it makes sense since Panjshir was kind of a concentration of the Mujahideen, right? And Nuristan would be their kind of rat line corridor to Pakistan for arms or X, Y, and Z, that the Panjshiris would start wearing the Pekal hat, right? Mm-hmm. As such, the Pekal hat became a symbol, but of like the Northern Alliance of the anti-Taliban resistance in the country. So up until the democratic government came to being, the Pekal hat was worn by like very few people. It was a very kind of it was very limited to those kinds of districts, right? And it was like very political. And with the democratic government and their kind of 20-year existence, right, it became more and more popular. More provinces start putting their spin on it, right? And it stays that way until the Taliban takes over the country, right? And the interesting thing is the Taliban, who are very controlling over what people wear, obviously, they didn't ban the Pekal hat, but they wear a very specific style. So like they put their spin on it rather than...
Is it the way it's rolled so tight on the top of their head, and then there's like...
And it cuts off the circulation to your brain.
Yeah. Like it's super tight rolled. It's almost like a beret.
That is much more of like the
Northern
style, right? That's more like the Mujahideen style. What the Taliban guys that I've photographed and saw and met, like what they wear is larger. It's like almost like Rastafarian. Like it's larger, poofier. They have like more hair, I guess. I don't know. It's just like it's like a larger, like bigger thing, right? I think some of these guys put their like Shadada pins on there, but it's like a much larger, bigger thing. And it has a kind of like
seen that
embroidery on the top. It's a totally different thing, but that's something that you didn't really see in the past that you see now. And for me, that's one of the reasons that like fashion is an interesting way to analyze conflict, like the cultural aspect of conflict, right? It's easier for us to be like, oh, ERDL is like super sick and I love Tiger Stripe, but the psychology behind those decisions and how they come into prominence, right? That to me is like fascinating.
Right. Like where did Tiger Stripe, why was it even created? Why was the South Vietnamese advisors wearing it? Why did the U.S. start to adopt it?
And how did it go?
And run with it?
How did it become like a punk rock staple, right? That wasn't just like it was.
Well, because the 70s, the 60s and 70s, surplus. Right. Yeah, surplus.
It was surplus, but it was also Joe Strummer, right? So like, I couldn't tell you which one came first, right? But like, punk guys are all wearing surplus, right? And they love subverting boots. Uniforms and things like that. But Joe Strummer is obsessed with Vietnam, right? And he's obsessed with Vietnam photographers. He wrote at least one song about Sean Flynn, and it was something he researched quite a lot, and I think like became part of his psychology. So like, I don't know if he started wearing the stuff because it was available, and then that made him research things, or if he was like researching things and then he got into the uniforms. I don't know, but the psychology of that is crazy, right? Like we go from something that is very much a part of like the state uniform doing things that are, borderline illegal and deniable in other countries, right, to what punk rockers are making iconic on stages around the world.
And Joel Strummer, he's the Clash and Big Audio Dynamite, right? For those of us that are listening that may not know, right? Yeah,
but we could just say the Clash, right?
The Clash, yeah. Well, I had to say Big Audio Dynamite. I had to give him his credit. I had that cassette, bro. When you say that, it's just like, again, the whole thing about Tiger Stripe having gold or having different types of green, and just like all these different, I love Tiger Stripe. I love Tiger, like the orange and black stripes.
Yeah. Well, and even that,
alone, like all the subdued versions.
It's an imitation of nature, right? That came from the specific place that we were thinking about, right? And most Tiger Stripe was made in, quite a lot of it was like made in Japan, right? And that was because of their post-war economy. It's like all these things are tied together, and it's a single thread that you can kind of pick up and really trace the social and cultural influence on a lot of different sides of any conflict. So I think that's, to me, like that's something my mind is preoccupied with way too much, probably.